Hi everybody, and welcome back to From the Shelf. I'm Miss Cindy from the South Brunswick Public Library, and today we're going to keep going with our story, The Wind in the Willows, by Kenneth Grahame. Today's chapter, Chapter 8, is entitled Toad's Adventures. When Toad found himself immured in a dark and noisome dungeon, and knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world, he shed bitter tears and abandoned himself to a dark despair. "This is the end of everything," he said. "At least it is the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable Toad, the Toad so free and careless and debonair. How can I hope to ever be set at large again," he said, "who have been imprisoned so justly, for stealing so handsome a motor car in such an audacious manner, and for such lurid and imaginative cheek bestowed upon such a number of fat, red-faced policemen." Here his sob choked him. "Stupid animal that I was! Now I must languish in this dungeon till people who were proud to say they knew me have forgotten the very name of Toad." With lamentations such as these, he passed his days and nights for several weeks, refusing his meals or intermediate light refreshments, though the grim and ancient jailer, knowing that Toad's pockets were well lined, frequently pointed out that many comforts could by arrangement be sent in, at a price, from outside. Now, the jailer had a daughter, a pleasant and good-hearted wench, who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals. This kind-hearted girl, pitying the misery of Toad, said to her father one day, "Father, I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy and getting so thin. You let me have the managing of him. You know how fond of animals I am. I'll make him eat from my hand and sit up and do all sorts of things." Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad anyway. So that day she went on her errand of mercy and knocked at the door of Toad's cell. "Now cheer up, Toad, and sit up and dry your eyes and be a sensible animal. And do try and eat a bit of dinner. See, I've brought you some of mine, hot from the oven." Still he wailed and kicked with his legs and refused to be comforted. So the wise girl retired for a time. When the girl returned, some hours later, she carried a tray, with a cup of fragrant tea steaming on it, and a plate piled up with very hot buttered toast, cut thick, very brown on both sides, with the butter running through the holes in it in great golden drops, like honey from the honeycomb. The smell of that buttered toast simply talked to Toad, and with no uncertain voice, talked of warm kitchens, of breakfast on bright frosty mornings, of cozy parlor firesides on winter evenings. Toad sat up on end once more, dried his eyes, sipped his tea, and munched his toast, and soon began talking freely about himself and the house he lived in and his doings there, and how important he was and what all his friends thought of him. The jailer's daughter saw that the topic was doing him as much good as the tea, and encouraged him to go on. "Tell me about Toad Hall," she said. "It sounds beautiful." Toad Hall is an eligible, self-contained gentleman's residence, very unique, dating in part from the 14th century, but replete with every modern convenience, up-to-date sanitation, 5 minutes from the church, post office, and golf links, suitable for... "Bless the animal," said the girl. "I don't want to take it. Tell me something real about it." Toad, his spirits quite restored to their usual level, told her about the boathouse and the fish pond and the old walled kitchen garden, and about the pigsties and the stables and the pigeon house and the hen house and the dairy and the wash house and the china cupboards and the linen presses, and about the banquet hall and the fun they had there when the other animals were gathered round the table, and Toad was at his best, singing songs, telling stories, carrying on generally. When she finally said good night, having filled his water jug and shaken up his straw for him, Toad was very much the same sanguine, self-satisfied animal that he had been of old. He sang a little song or two, of the sort he used to sing before, curled himself up in the straw, and had an excellent night's rest, and the pleasantest of dreams. They had many interesting talks together after that, as the dreary days went on. Toad, of course, in his vanity, thought that her interest in him proceeded from a growing tenderness, and he could not help half regretting that the social gulf between them was so very wide, for she was a comely lass, and evidently admired him very much. One morning the girl was very thoughtful and answered at random and did not seem to Toad to be paying proper attention to his witty sayings and sparkly comments. "Toad," she said, "just listen, please. I have an aunt who is a washerwoman." There, never mind. Think no more about it. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen," he said. "Do be quiet a minute, Toad," said the girl. "You talk too much. I'm trying to think and you hurt my head. As I said, I have an aunt who is a washerwoman. She does the washing for all the prisoners in the castle. We try to keep any paying business of that sort in the family, you understand. She takes out the washing on Monday morning and brings it in on Friday evenings. This is a Thursday. Now this is what occurs to me. You're very rich, or at least you're always telling me. A few pounds wouldn't make any difference to you, and it would mean a lot to her. Now, I think if she were properly approached, you could come to some arrangement by which she would let you have her dress and bonnet, and you could escape from the castle as the official washerwoman. You're very alike in many respects." "We are not," said Toad in a huff. "I have a very elegant figure for what I am." "So has my aunt," replied the girl, "for what she is. But have it your own way, you horrid, proud, ungrateful animal, when I'm sorry for you and trying to help you." Yes, that's all right. Thank you very much indeed," said the Toad. "But look here, you wouldn't surely have Mr. Toad of Toad Hall going about the country disguised as a washerwoman?" "Then you can stop here as a toad," replied the girl with much spirit. "I suppose you want to go off in a coach and four." Honest Toad was always ready to admit himself in the wrong. "You are a good, kind, clever girl," he said, "and I am indeed a proud and stupid toad. Introduce me to your worthy aunt, if you would be so kind, and I have no doubt that the excellent lady and I will be able to arrange terms satisfactory to both parties." The next evening, the girl ushered in her aunt into Toad's cell, bearing his week's washing pinned up in a towel. The old lady had been prepared beforehand for the interview, and the sight of certain gold sovereigns that Toad had thoughtfully placed on the table in full view practically completed the matter and left little further to discuss. In return for his cash, Toad received a cotton print gown, an apron, a shawl, and a rusty black bonnet. The only stipulation the old lady made being that she should be gagged and bound and dumped down in a corner. By this not very convincing artifice, she explained, she hoped to retain her situation, in spite of the suspicious appearance of things. Toad was delighted with the suggestion. It would enable him to leave the prison in some style, and with his reputation for being a desperate and dangerous fellow untarnished. "Now it's your turn, Toad. Take off that coat and waistcoat of yours. You're fat enough as it is." "Take off that coat and waistcoat of yours. You're fat enough as it is." Shaking with laughter, she proceeded to hook and eye him into the cotton print gown, arrange the shawl, and tie the strings of her rusty bonnet under his chin. "You're the very image of her. Only now I'm sure you never looked half so respectable in your life before. Goodbye, Toad, and good luck. Go straight down the way you came up, and if anyone says anything to you, as they probably will, go straight down the way you came up." With a quaking heart, but as firm a footstep as he could command, Toad set forth cautiously, on what seemed to be a most harebrained and hazardous undertaking. But he was soon surprised at how easy everything was made for him. The washerwoman's figure in its familiar cotton print seemed a passport for every barred door and grim gateway. Even when he hesitated, uncertain as to the right turning to take, he found himself helped out of his difficulty by the warder at the next gate, anxious to be off to his tea. It seemed hours before he crossed the last courtyard, rejected the pressing invitations from the last guard-room, and dodged the outspread arms of the last warder, pleading for just one farewell embrace. But at last he heard the wicket gate in the great outer door click behind him, felt the fresh air, and knew that he was free. Dizzy with the easy success of his daring exploit, he walked quickly towards the lights of the town, not knowing in the least what he should do next, only certain that he must remove himself as quickly as possible from a neighborhood where the lady he was forced to represent was so well known and so popular a character. He made his way to a railway station, consulted a timetable, and found that a train, bound more or less in the direction of his home, was due to start in half an hour. "What luck!" said Toad, his spirits rising rapidly, and went off to the booking office to buy his ticket. He gave the name of the station that he knew to be nearest to the village, of which Toad Hall was the principal feature, and mechanically put his fingers, in search of the necessary money, where his waistcoat pocket should have been. But here the cotton gown, which had nobly stood by him so far, and which he had basely forgotten, intervened and frustrated his efforts. At last, somehow, he never rightly understood how, he burst the barriers, attained the goal, arrived at where all waistcoat pockets are eternally situated, and found not only no money, but no pocket to hold it, and no waistcoat to hold the pocket. To his horror, he recollected that he had left both coat and waistcoat behind in his cell, and with them his pocketbook, money, keys, watch, matches, pencil case, all that makes life worth living, all that distinguishes the many-pocketed animal from the inferior, one-pocketed or no-pocketed productions that hop or trip about permissively unequipped for the real contest. In his misery, he made one desperate effort to carry the thing off, and with a return to his fine old manner, he said, "Look here, I find I've left my purse behind. Just give me that ticket, will you, and I'll send the money on tomorrow. I'm well known in these parts." The clerk stared at him and then laughed. "I should think you were pretty well known in these parts," he said, "if you try this game often. Here, stand away from the window, please, madam. You're obstructing the other passengers." An old gentleman who had been prodding him in the back for some moments here thrust him away, and what was worse, addressed him as his good woman, which angered Toad more than anything that had occurred that evening. Baffled and full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform where the train was standing, and tears trickled down each side of his nose. It was hard, he thought, to be within sight of safety and almost of home, and to be balked by the want of a few wretched shillings and by the pettifogging mistrustfulness of paid officials. Very soon his escape would be discovered, the hunt would be up, and he would be caught, reviled, loaded with chains, dragged back to prison. What was to be done? He was not swift of foot, his figure was unfortunately recognizable. Could he not squeeze under the seat of a carriage? He had seen this method adopted by schoolboys. As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being oiled, wiped, and generally caressed by its affectionate driver, a burly man with an oil can in one hand and a lump of cotton waste in the other. "Hello, mother," said the engine driver. "What's the trouble? You don't look particularly cheerful." "Oh, sir," said Toad, crying afresh, "I am a poor, unhappy washerwoman, and I've lost all my money and can't pay for a ticket, and I must get home tonight somehow, and whatever I am to do, I don't know. Oh, dear." "That's a bad business indeed," said the engine driver. "Lost your money and can't get home, and got some kids, too, waiting for you, I dare say." "Any amount of 'em," sobbed Toad, "and they'll be hungry and playing with matches and upsetting lamps, the little innocents, and quarreling and going on generally. Oh, dear." "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do," said the good engine driver. "You're a washerwoman to your trade, says you. Very well, that's that. And I'm an engine driver, as you may well see. There's no denying it's terribly dirty work. If you'll wash a few shirts for me when you get home and send 'em along, I'll give you a ride on my engine. It's against the company's regulations, but we're not so very particular in these out-of-the-way parts." The Toad's misery turned into rapture as he eagerly scrambled onto the cab of the engine. Of course, he had never washed a shirt in his life, and couldn't if he tried, and anyhow he wasn't going to begin now. But he thought, when I get safely home to Toad Hall, and have money again, and pockets to put it in, I will send the engine driver enough to pay for quite a quantity of washing, and that will be the same thing, or better. The guard waved his welcome flag, the engine driver whistled in cheerful response, and the train moved out of the station. They had covered many and many a mile, and Toad was already considering what he would have for supper as soon as he got home, when he noticed that the engine driver, with a puzzled expression on his face, was leaning over the side of the engine and listening hard. Then he saw him climb onto the coals and gaze out over the top of the train. He returned and said to Toad, "It's very strange. We're the last train running in this direction tonight, yet I could be sworn that I heard another one following us." Toad ceased his frivolous antics at once. he became grave and depressed, and a dull pain in the lower part of his spine, communicating itself to his legs, made him want to sit down and try desperately not to think of all the possibilities. By this time the moon was shining brightly, and the engine driver could command a view of the line behind them for a long distance. Presently he called out, "I can see it clearly now. It is an engine on our rails, coming along at a great pace." The miserable Toad, crouching in the coal dust, tried hard to think of something to do, with dismal want of success. "They are gaining on us fast," cried the engine driver, "and the engine is crowded with the queerest lot of people. Men like ancient warders, waving halberds, policemen in their helmets waving truncheons, and shabbily dressed men in pot hats, obvious and unmistakable plain-clothes detectives, even at a distance, waving revolvers and walking sticks, all waving and all shouting the same thing, 'Stop! Stop! Stop!'" Then Toad fell on his knees among the coals, and raising his clasped paws in supplication, cried, "Save me! Oh, save me, dear kind Mr. Engine Driver, and I will confess everything. I am not the simple washerwoman I seem to be. I have no children waiting for me. I am a Toad, the well-known and popular Mr. Toad, a landed proprietor. I have just escaped by my great daring and cleverness from a loathsome dungeon in which my enemies had flung me, and if those fellows on that engine recapture me, it will be chains and bread and water and straw and misery once more for poor, unhappy, innocent Toad." The engine driver looked upon him very sternly and said, "Now tell the truth. What were you in prison for?" "It was nothing very much," said poor Toad. "I only borrowed a motor car while the owners were at lunch. They had no need of it at the time. I didn't mean to steal it, really, but people take such harsh views of thoughtless and high-spirited actions." The engine driver looked very grave and said, "I fear that you have been indeed a wicked Toad, and by rights I ought to give you up to offended justice. But you are evidently in sore troubles and distress, so I will not desert you. I don't hold with motor cars for one thing, and I don't hold with being ordered about by policemen when I'm on my own engine for another. And the sight of an animal in tears always makes me feel soft-hearted. So cheer up, Toad. I'll do my best, and we may beat them yet." They piled on more coals, shoveling furiously. The furnace roared, the sparks flew, the engine leapt and swung, but still their pursuers slowly gained. The engine driver, with a sigh, wiped his brow with a handful of cotton, and said, "I'm afraid it's no good, Toad. You see they're running light, and they have the bigger engine. There's only one thing left for us to do, and it's your only chance. A short way ahead of us is a long tunnel, and on the other side of that the line passes through a thick wood. Now I will put on all the speed I have while we are running through the tunnels, but the other fellows will slow down a bit naturally for fear of an accident. When we are through, I will shut off steam and put on brakes as hard as I can, and the moment it's safe for you to do so, you must jump and hide in the wood before they get through the tunnel and see you. Then I will go full speed ahead again, and they can chase me if they like, for as long as they like and as far as they like. Now mind and be ready to jump when I tell you." They piled on more coals, and the train shot into the tunnel. The driver shut off the steam and put on brakes. The Toad got down on the step, and as the train slowed down to almost a walking pace, he heard the driver call out, "Now jump!" Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, picked himself up, scrambled into the wood, and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train get up to speed again and disappear at a great pace. Then out of the tunnel burst the pursuing engine, roaring and whistling, "Stop! Stop!" When they were past, the Toad had a hearty laugh for the first time since he was thrown into prison. But he soon stopped laughing when he came to consider it was now very late and dark and cold, and he was in an unknown wood, with no money and no chance of supper, and still far from friends and home, and the dead silence of everything. After the roar and rattle of the train was something of a shock. And the dead silence of everything, after the roar and rattle of the train, was something of a shock. He dared not to leave the shelter of the trees, so he struck into the wood with the idea of leaving the railway as far as possible behind him. After so many weeks within walls, he found the wood strange and unfriendly and inclined, he thought, to make fun of him. Nightjars sounding their mechanical rattle made him think that the wood was full of searching warders closing in on him. An owl, swooping noiselessly towards him, brushed his shoulder with his wing, making him jump with the horrid certainty that it was a hand, then flitted off, moth-like, laughing, which Toad thought in very poor taste. Once he met a fox who stopped, looked at him up and down in a sarcastic sort of way, and said, "Hello, washerwoman, half a pair of socks and a pillowcase short this week. Mind it doesn't occur again," and swaggered off, snickering. Toad looked about for a stone to throw at him, but could not succeed in finding one, which vexed him more than anything. At last, cold, hungry, and tired out, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree, where with branches and dead leaves he made himself as comfortable a bed as he could, and slept soundly till the morning. Okay, that was it for Chapter 8. Make sure to join me next time on From the Shelf for Chapter 9. Goodbye!